Alright class, today we're going to dive into something really interesting that you've probably noticed when you look up at the night sky, the moon. Have you ever noticed how the moon seems to change its shape from night to night? Sometimes it's a big bright circle and other times it's just a tiny sliver. But guess what? The moon doesn't actually change its shape. It's all about what part of the moon we can see from Earth. These changes in how the moon looks are called phases, and they happen in a pattern. By the end of today, you'll be able to collect and analyze data to understand this pattern and even predict what the moon will look like on different days. So let's start by talking about the Sun, Earth, and Moon system. The moon orbits around the Earth, and as it moves, the sun shines light on it. But here's the thing. The sun only lights up half of the moon at a time. Sometimes we can see all of the lit part, and sometimes we can only see a little of it. That's why the moon looks different throughout the month, even though it's always the same size and shape. One of the cool things about the moon's phases is that they follow a pattern. If you pay close attention to the moon over several nights, you'll notice that it goes through a cycle, and this cycle happens every month. The moon starts out dark, and then over time, more and more of it becomes visible. It eventually becomes a full bright circle that we call a full moon. After that, the visible part starts to get smaller again until it's dark and the cycle starts all over. This is a pattern we can observe, collect data on, and predict. To study this, scientists, and you too, can collect data by observing the moon over several days or even weeks. You can make notes about how much of the moon you can see each night, whether it's getting bigger or smaller, and how long it takes to complete a full cycle. With enough observations, you'll notice that the moon goes through the same phases every time. This is what we call a cycle. A full lunar cycle takes about 29.5 days, so after about a month the pattern repeats itself. One of the best ways to understand the moon's phases is to draw or make models showing how the sun, Earth, and moon interact. You can see how the moon moves around the Earth and how the sun's light changes what we see from Earth. For example, when the moon is directly between the Earth and the sun, we can't see the lit side of the moon at all. This is called a new moon. As the moon moves, we begin to see more of the lit side, until we eventually see the entire lit side, which is the full moon. By analyzing the data we collect from watching the moon over time, we can start to predict what the moon will look like in the future. If we know that the moon goes through a full cycle every month, we can figure out that if we see a new moon today, we'll see a full moon in about 2 weeks. These patterns are really important in science because they help us make sense of what we see and understand how things work. So, the next time you look up at the night sky, remember that the changes you see in the moon follow a pattern that you can predict. By collecting and analyzing data on how the moon appears each night, you'll start to see the cycle and be able to tell what phase the moon will be in just by looking at a calendar. Isn't that amazing? Now let's get ready to observe the moon ourselves and see if we can track its phases over the next few weeks.